Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 intelligent intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, and here with my co-host Chris, the guy who just loves having brand names, McNulty.
I don't know if I love having brand names, trademark, copyright 2020. But today we're not talking about brand names, although we are talking to some definitely recognizable names throughout the fantastic SharePoint community. So we're going to be catching up with Joanne Klein, who is Microsoft MVP and a SharePoint and M365 consultant. We're also speaking with Ruven Gotz, Director of Workplace Experience at Avanade, and Daniel Glenn, who is the M365 Practice Lead at InfoWorks.
And today we are going to ask them that question. What drives them crazy about SharePoint? Those sticky situations that they've gotten into, and most importantly, how they got out of it and became more productive and hopefully lessened the crazy making. Sure to be relatable and of course sure to be insightful.
It's an interesting topic to talk about SharePoint driving you crazy because it's a fair question. Can any technology truly drive someone crazy? And I would submit probably not on your own. I think it requires people in the matrix to make someone crazy. There's definitely a sea change in SharePoint before and after May 4th. And that's a reference to relaunch event, 4.5 years ago down in San Francisco on May 4th, 2016. I think for SharePoint's childhood into adolescence, SharePoint was very much a box of tools. And we, on premises, let users assemble and reassemble and tweak and adjust and customize and code in all sorts of ways, with the result being that what was making someone crazy wasn't SharePoint, the product, but SharePoint, the implementation.
But to be fair, there are things that have been refined over the years. Obviously, lots of learnings from either a design perspective, whether they were easy to, engage with as far as the user experience. If there were some ones and zeros missing that maybe didn't enable you to accomplish what you were trying to do, or it wasn't as clear. I think there were some things that were product-based, and not only speaking about SharePoint, but there is technology out there that maybe wasn't perfect on round one, or in some areas, there are some corners that aren't perfectly rounded. But your mention of on-premises really reminds me of, imagine a world if we were still in server land where you did come across something that made you a little crazy, or you didn't like, or you just hoped that would, get additional features so it would become better. And in on-premises, in server land, that was every 3 years where you had that hope. The benefit now is not only do you have to not wait as long, but I think what we'll hear from the people that we're talking with today, with Joanne, Ruven, and Daniel, is how do they work around that? Not so much the things that are just broken, but things that could be better, or you just want them to be a little bit different.
With the on-premises heritage, leveling a complaint that SharePoint was incomplete at any given release is fair. As we like to say, that's good feedback, because you wait 3 years, you get a release, you hope it's doing the things that you want it to do. Whereas in the cloud, SharePoint is in many ways always going to be incomplete, right? There's always something to do, or refinement, a usability tweak. And I do think it's important, as a product team, that we listen to those opportunities for improvement. What may be frustrating to one person is completely not an issue for another. And that's something that we definitely have to balance out. Now, I'm thinking about one of the an article I remember in business school that was talking about the launch of Facebook, and how Facebook in its first couple of years, as you might recall, had a limitation that to sign up, you had to have an email address that ended in .edu, because they were going up against MySpace, which was the incumbent in social networks. Anyone could sign up, millions and millions and millions of users. But what Facebook managed to do by limiting something is they allowed them to focus on something else. And as a result, they got to manage to innovate on something that hadn't happened before, which was getting to critical mass and penetration inside of these tight communities, which was really the springboard that created the network effect that launched the Facebook that we know today. So, one person's shortcoming is another person's opportunity.
I think there's two other pivots too that you got me thinking about is, imagine if SharePoint weren't a platform, that it was really a closed black box that you couldn't do much with beyond what it is that Microsoft presented. And then on the other side of the spectrum is imagine of all of the plethora of features, there's always going to be just a percentage of what you utilize or what everybody maybe collectively utilizes, even up to some balance of that percentage. But there is going to be some of those outliers. And some people also are just going to come at it with a different skill set, comfort level of, hitting a not necessarily a complete barrier, but just a little bit of a jump to get to whatever that next task is, or reading documentation to further along, right? Just a little bit of not necessarily code, but just, figure out how to do things, tinker it with a little bit. And I think that balance of maintaining, having SharePoint be offered as a platform does two things. It maybe keeps it, where there's going to be some of those areas where you kind of have to build it for it to do X, but it also will never be met as a real limitation because there's a lot of great ways where you can extend SharePoint. And that is really, really true when you look at what our partners, especially the three that we will talk to today, and how they constantly are doing that on purpose.
Right. I think that every person is on their own level of evolution. And some are casual users of the technology. And some, like me, like you, have been working on SharePoint for the better part of 2 decades. And I think the more skilled you are, the more likely you are to get out on the periphery where you're more likely to run into something that just may turn into a little bit of a pet peeve. And I'll own this because it's a mix that's unique to me. There's a fantastic feature for delivering persistent, beautiful updates to a team or an organization called SharePoint News. And one of the features inside SharePoint News lets you promote it, a given post, over email, which is an understandable feature because not everyone is going to just hit refresh on the SharePoint homepage all the time. And so with that, I will own this. I am a terrible typist. If you ever actually watch me type, I don't use all the fingers. I wish that added experience when you're sharing a SharePoint News post was Outlook-like, but that's something that's going to be unique to me and my crazy 6-finger typing skill.
You remind me not to pick a sword fight with you if you've got 6 fingers.
That's I type across both hands, but yes, prepare to die.
Yes, you must prepare to type. Oh, I mean, to die.
But to be fair, if I ever went into a backlog review meeting and I saw this come up, sure, I'd love to see that feature change. I'd be hard pressed to seriously vote for it over many of the other enhancements and updates that the team is working on. And so it shouldn't make anyone crazy. It's just going to make me crazy because, of course, I'm crazy.
Right. But with that crazy leads to opportunity. You said vote or vote it up. There's that opportunity to let us know through user voice. Obviously, people take to Twitter and subreddits and all these things to raise awareness of things that they don't like or would prefer to be better or different. But it's also, I think, especially, again, back to the platform scenario, it's an opportunity to figure out a solution. It's an opportunity to find a workaround. There may be a point in time where things get fixed, adjusted, updated. We'll never know about it unless you let us know. And in the meantime, there is, again, a lot fewer roadblocks, more perception than reality. And I hope that this spurs on some crazy making to the 3 folks that we're inviting as guests here, but to also explain then what did they do about it? That's where I think the real value is.
About 20 years ago, James Blake wrote a book on chaos theory. And one of his points in there is that chaos is a completely misunderstood word, that interesting things happen on the periphery, things like turbulence that are really hard to model mathematically. But if everything was smooth with no rough edges, oxygen would never actually enter the bloodstream of living things, that it takes a little turbulence to create energy and life. And I do think the fact that no matter how complete we make SharePoint as a platform, as an application, some of those quirks can provide the seeds for someone to come up with an innovation that works not just for themselves, but for others. And that's why you have a really diverse ecosystem.
Yeah, I think then with that, let's take the chaos theory. Let's get the blood pumping. Let's invite and turn to Joanne, Ruven, and Daniel to help assess their crazy making experiences that they've had with SharePoint, but really to view then how they stuck with SharePoint through the years, intertwined with good lessons learned and best practices. And you'll see that there is calm within this chaos, right, Chris?
Absolutely. I can't wait to bring them in. Welcome to the show. This theme is SharePoint drives me crazy and drives everyone crazy. And we know for all of the really innovative solutions that this platform has been bringing to our customers for nearly 20 years, something so broad invariably has things that can be frustrating or leads to clever workarounds. Would love to bring everyone together to share the good, the bad, and the ugly of what your experience has been with SharePoint. And I think we're going to lean a little bit more on the ugly. It's a couple days past Halloween, but I think we can still tell a few ghost stories.
This is really to learn about what makes these specific people crazy when it comes to this thing that we all really, truly, dearly love, SharePoint. But, there's a little bit behind of the good and the bad, the love and the hate, the crazy making of SharePoint. Joanne, before we get into what makes you crazy about SharePoint in this broader tech world, can we learn a little bit about, before we know what makes Joanne crazy, what makes Joanne sane?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for inviting me on the show. Good question. I'm Joanne Klein, and I work for myself now. I've been in the SharePoint business for, probably a decade, I would say. Starting in SharePoint 2007 and did the on-prem thing. It kind of was given to me through the other SharePoint admin leaving. So from that moment on, I just dug in and experienced both the on-prem world and all of that frustration at times. And now I am pretty much 100% cloud. So I've made that full transition. So I've seen a lot of things on the SharePoint world and happy to be here today.
And just from a little short context, do you have a specific portion of the productivity space that you work in, or would you say you're jack of all trades? Do you have a certain focus?
Yeah, my focus is definitely on the security compliance, information governance aspect of Microsoft 365 right now. And almost exclusively all my clients are in that space, and that's what they reach out to me for.
Excellent. So we have two other crazy folks that are in this mix with Chris and I today, and we'll want to focus just bringing Ruven into the conversation. Ruven, can you give us a sense of what you're doing these days and how you got to where you are?
Sure. I've been working in this space for a long time and with SharePoint since 2003, going through MVP and speaking at conferences. My space was also very strong in the world of information architecture, metadata, content types, and helping clients be successful with their SharePoint deployments. More recently, I have a bigger space that I work in, what we call workplace experience. So it's really thinking about all of those communication, collaboration, productivity, suite of tools that Microsoft offers and how we can make our customers successful with that. So I'm part of a very large team that tells those stories and delivers the results for our clients.
And so with information architecture, with Joanne focused on security, I'm very interested to hear from both of you, obviously, what has driven you crazy about SharePoint, specifically if there was anything that really was, super deep and important in the context of how it might be impacting the rollout or the perception of how things are going. Before we get there, we've got a third crazy person on this call. Daniel, crazy or not, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of your SharePoint background?
That wouldn't be the first time I've been called crazy, so that's okay.
And it's not the last.
It will not be the last, I'm sure.
It probably won't be the last for this call.
Well, right. Hello, everyone. Daniel Glenn. What I focus on right now is migrations, workflow, and really those out-of-the-box experiences and getting people to adopt platform. I started off this crazy journey with SharePoint Portal Server 2001. The way I got started was I was actually a secure FTP and BlackBerry server admin on top of being a Lotus Domino server admin. And my boss brought a 2U server. He took off of a rack and put it on my desk and said, here is a server, turn it into machines on it, and I want you to build out a SharePoint farm. We need to upgrade to the newest version of 2003 SharePoint. So I had to learn Portal Server 2001. I had to learn STS version 1, those team services, and so I could then create the new intranet in 2003. So that's how I started my journey. And yes, it was quite crazy.
Joanne, I want to throw to you first in terms of any missing feature or change that happened in the service without a lot of warning, or something in the past or recent. Where would you start in thinking in terms of something that drove you, or on behalf of your customer voicing their opinions, something that drove you to the brink?
I had to think quite long and hard about this. And I think what I'd have to focus in on would be SharePoint search. We go back quite a ways, and I started cutting my teeth on it in SharePoint 2010. And there's a fairly steep learning curve. If you want to get in and understand search and be able to manipulate it and contort the results so they are in a form that's pleasing to the end users, then you really need to dig in and understand what that is. And what I soon discovered is, there's all these settings in the back end that you can use to kind of control your world. And whether you should use them or not is another thing. So you can get into some trouble there if you don't kind of pay attention and know what you're doing. So that just because the capability is there doesn't really mean you should be using it. So I got into some interesting situations, developing some fairly large scale solutions based on search for customers. That was something I would say was a challenge for sure.
And was that search, true search, where you go to the search center, or it sounds like it might have been search experiences in portals and sites?
Yeah, it was building another application that leveraged the search APIs to bring in a very large volume of data and apply retention to them. And it was a fairly big undertaking, pretty much, not entirely, but pretty much built on search. So yeah, it was an interesting application. I believe they're still using it today. That is on a SharePoint 2013 environment, I believe. Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to Batman's Joker, how crazy did it make you?
Pretty crazy. I always say SharePoint kind of builds up a barrier on you. Like when you first start, little things kind of tick you off, and then you kind of build up a resistance to that, and you kind of let it go, because I'm not going to get all uptight about this. But yeah, it was a struggle. But I got to say, I learned a ton going through that exercise. And I love search today, and I really like where some of the changes are happening in SharePoint Online and Microsoft Search. So it's paid off in the long run, but I paid my dues over the years, I feel.
It's funny, Joanne, hearing you mention that. I remember, more than 15 years ago, we had we thought bright idea to the fact that in SharePoint 2003 that you could suddenly index things in file shares and all over the place. Like, let's just index everything so we can have a massive search index. And we did get a massive search index, and you could find thousands and thousands of documents that you couldn't find before, but you'd have to page through thousands and thousands of results to get to it.
Yeah.
It was, you solve one problem and sometimes you just move on to the next constraint.
Yeah.
We used to call it the magic SharePoint document creator. You type in a word and you get some random documents back.
Well, it has also been the underpinning of a lot of workaround solutions when people are doing portals at scale and they're building out the content by query type experiences. There's a threshold of, what is supported and what kind of moves beyond. And those slow loading pages, sounds like you were even before the page loaded. There's just problems of making the connections, but it is definitely an area of awareness and improvements that have definitely been derived from lots of maybe misery and pain. All right. So Daniel, on the scale of search being where we start, where would you take it in describing what has made you a little crazy in the past or currently?
I think search is a perfect example of something that could drive you crazy. For me, though, it really is around what drives me crazy or has driven me crazy is around customization and making SharePoint be not what it was supposed to be. Or what someone in maybe marketing said, here's this platform, you can build and make it whatever you want.
Chris said it.
Exactly what year was that? Because I have plausible deniability for more than half of the time SharePoint has been out.
So really, and let me kind of narrow that down. When you go to and start using SharePoint as something that's not supposed to be or wasn't originally built to be, you do crazy things. Custom master pages has been the problem child of SharePoint from the very beginning. You create that custom master page because you want some wonky thing in navigation, which you could easily do another way. But no, we're going to do a custom master page. But then when we go to upgrade, we have issues. And that kind of leads to, okay, upgrades has driven me crazy from the very beginning. When, I told that story about how I got involved with SharePoint. That upgrade to 2003 was horrendous because even in 2001, they were customizing things, my company that I was working for. And so when I went to upgrade it, it was something, and it was kind of a foreshadowing of where we are now, because we got to the point of saying, we're not going to upgrade. We're going to build new. And we're going to just kind of migrate things over instead of trying to make what we did in 2001 work in 2003. And that's where we are now. Right? At least that's what I'm telling people. Don't carry over your customization junk. Try to stay out of the box as much as possible. So that's kind of the old thing that drives me crazy.
I want to pick at your old wound just a little bit to understand, because I do understand it, but I'd love to hear it in like how you might frame when you say it was horrendous. What did it take to get from 2001 to 2003 because of those issues? Was it a week of work? Was it months of work? Or it was, it just couldn't be done, so we had to abandon 50% of the value?
Yeah, you got to think about Portal Server 2001 was really different. It was an odd character when you think about what SharePoint is. Even with 2003, 2007, it just was an oddball. And so when we went to create the 2003 sites, it really was an abandoning what had been created and just trying to recreate what was done instead of, doing a pure upgrade. It was, I think, a good thing. Now, of course, they customized 2003 once we got there, but it was a good thing to get rid of those customizations. Now, and also, if you think about this, when we had 2001, when that product was created, an STS version 1, it wasn't really. Maybe it was, I wasn't there, but I don't think there was this vision of, we've released this and now we're going to have this new product, 2 years later, and people are going to have to upgrade. There might have been a little bit of that thinking, but I'm not sure there was a lot of thinking of how will they upgrade when 2001 was released. That was part of that learning experience and part of that pain.
So how would you put it on a scale of 1 to that elevator blood scene in The Shining?
The editor's cut. I mean, I think anyone who has done branding and of course upgrading or migrating SharePoint will commiserate with me that it is just so painful when you inherit customizations that you have to somehow get to the next destination.
Ruven, you have heard Joanne's search experiences. You've heard Daniel's platform customization migration issues. Where does your craziness lie in what you can think of what really has made you pull your hair out?
So I started thinking about this last night in preparation for this call. I don't really get my hands dirty in SharePoint very much these days, and I was never a developer. And a lot of the craziness is around development and things like customizing master pages. But I've got a bunch of little things that, as I was helping my clients figure stuff out, things like I renamed the title column, and and you can't change it back. It's renamed everywhere. You have that thing called title, and you wanted to call it something else. You wanted to call it name. So an innocent user renamed it, and now title is gone everywhere, and you can't switch it, and you can't fix it. That was hair-pullingly crazy. Another one along those same lines is I require check-in on all documents. And here I am getting started with my new site. I upload my documents. They're invisible because they're not checked in, and therefore they don't display. But what's hair-pulling about that is the person who uploads them can see them. It's just nobody else can see them. The ultimate, it works on my machine scenario. So, yeah.
Boy, they really are focused on that one document, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, so those are a couple. I got more, but we'll start with those.
No, I'd love to hear maybe one or two more. If it's a one thing for Daniel and Joanne, I'm sure it's others, but they declared one thing. But yours is this approach of 1,000,000 cuts or 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
We want to give you a couple more cuts to cut in.
The friendly _X0020 because you put blanks in the names of things. It was an unpleasant experience. Hey, we're migrating by bringing over a pile of folders. The URL got too long, and now we're messed up. Those limitations. I'm going to steal one of Joanne's things that she got today. I pinged her and I told her, you're cheating, because she posted on Twitter, what drives you crazy around SharePoint? And I had to think hard last night. I think one of the best ones was, I love how SharePoint makes it so easy to do 90% of what you want to do. And I hate how it takes so hard to get that last 10% of what you needed to do.
Yeah. I saw that and I thought, hey, Joanne, if you were to enumerate, just the 3 or 4 things that popped up or maybe a common theme, what would you say the rest of the world told you immediately?
List view threshold was a clear winner. Broken permissions was probably a close second. And surprisingly, and as soon as I read it, I thought, yeah, that kind of bugged me too, is the settings button moving from the right to the left. It seems like such a minor, trivial thing, but it has messed me up on more than one occasion when you're flipping from the classic to the modern world.
So Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, this is unscripted.
Yeah. Do you have something that drives you crazy?
Well, the thing, and I'll kind of go into the history book, but not that long ago. And to be honest, it's one area where I really am thankful of the improvements. But the one that I got hit individually really hard on was the failed sync when we switched or were switching into the OneDrive sync. And I'm not going to blame, our old friend, our old sync client, the groove.exe, but there were still some issues in the early days of sync. And I got hit really hard where I really just lost my content for a couple of days before I could retrieve it with a little help. And that was individually crazy making and super grateful to the progress that's been made since then. But when you have those individual experiences, you think, imagine this if it were to happen at any percentage scale to any size customer. It's one of those where it's like, whew, we got to fix that. But if you put me a little on the spot, Chris, whether it was pre-working for Microsoft or now at Microsoft, what's your crazy making?
I'm going to be brave because, you all have been very cautious by picking at things that may not have been working great in the product over a decade ago. But mine is relatively recent. If you think about the last few years, everything that we've been doing with modern SharePoint about making it easier to set up teams, and you have these much flatter information architectures, and it's much more dynamic. And then we released this thing this year called Microsoft Lists. And I can tell you internally at Microsoft, lists are becoming even more pervasive than ever before. People are using lists for lots of things that they might have used Excel for previously. My thing that drives me crazy is we make it difficult to move a list from one place to another. So you have one project team and you've got a set of activities or dates. We use things to kind of schedule social posts and blog posts. then you reorganize into a new team, but you still have the list in the old place. And yes, you can run a migration. And yes, we have access to migration tools. But gosh, I just wish that there was, we have all of these sites that are around that are otherwise 2 or 3 years out of date, but we're keeping them live because the lists are still in there. So that's the one thing I would say that drives me the craziest.
That's good. And just to be frank, Chris, I'm not going to be here to defend my new child, my new baby Microsoft lists, but I will tell you without giving away too much of the future, 2 teams are talking, and the one team has said, yes, we will be able to do that. We're just looking for resources and time, and I hope to be able to share soon the plan for moving lists. Definitely similar feedback has been given, and they were not as gracious as you, but I'll say that to be fair, they were hitting a real need, and it was really great that we got the visibility of what they were looking to do. But I want to just cut back to Ruven really quickly to understand, before we get into maybe some of the progress and the workaround of some of the things that you've seen. But Ruven, with those 1,000 cuts that SharePoint gave you over the years, on a scale of 1 to Annie Wilkes's sledgehammer swing in misery, how crazy did it make you?
Well, some of those were really crazy making. Things that were not reversible, easily reversible, like changing the name of the title column, were very, very annoying, or creating something with a space in it, and now you're going to live forever with those X0020s. Those kinds of things are very, very crazy making, and kind of make you look stupid for recommending the product.
Oh.
Sometimes, but
yeah.
But of course, yeah, some of those were like that.
If part of the conversation today is to up-level, the realities that this is not a perfect world, nor is SharePoint a perfect product, whether today or over its past, I think with you, specifically the 3 of you and representative people who are willing to dive in and tackle and figure things out, specific to what you called out already, Joanne, if in your experiences with search, talking about progress to date, or Ruven thinking of these thousands cuts, or Daniel from a customization perspective, I'd first love to hear what's your approach when things aren't going well. To when you're looking for a workaround, what are some of the first things that you do so that you aren't going to purely go to the loony bin? You roll up your sleeves and do what? Joanne, start with you.
Depending on what the problem is, I usually check for a service advisory just to make sure that I'm not losing my mind and there's not a documented issue going on. And then I'll double check, triple check, quadruple check my work. And then I'll usually go to my social channels or professional connections and just kind of ask for some advice on what it is I'm doing. And I mean, you get to the point when you've been in it long enough that you just, you stay chill and you just try to figure it out. It's always interesting working with new people to SharePoint, because it's a skill I think you hone over the years. It's just to calmly work the problem, and usually you either determine it can't be done and you just live with the results, or you find another way. That's my strategy.
It's a good strategy. I think, hearing tips and tricks, especially, hey, it sounds like we got a dog. What's going on? We got a dog. We got a dog. Chris, tell us what's going on.
My dog's just jailbroke into my studio right here.
I just heard the click, 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 and I thought maybe SharePoint is driving them crazy as well. So, but I think that's a really important distinction of, you, of course, have been driven crazy once, and you can't just let it drive you crazy, over and over again. But to dig in and, see, is this happening to other people? Are there workarounds? Is there a fix that's coming? Daniel, similar tip or trick, or what might you think when, before you pull the hair out, or after you've gone outside, yelled a little bit?
That's what I was going to ask you. Before or after you scream into the pillow or go run, go take a...
Well, we want to include the what do you do first. And if that's scream into the pillow, that's important for people to know that that's okay.
It is most certainly okay. I think any way you deal with that stress and that anxiety that is not detrimental to yourself or others, it most likely is okay. For me, I try to take a step back and think. For those that know me, that they say, "Oh, that's probably pretty hard, Daniel." Yes, I thank you. But really, a lot of what we encounter is not new, and we have all these conversations with our fellow practitioners, people like Ruven and Joanne, who are in the field, who are working to make these fantastic solutions for their clients. And we talk about these things at conferences and on Twitter, or, we have private chats, one-on-one chats or whatever. I try to think, have I encountered this before, or have I heard about this before? Go do a search or something on Bing. And I also search in OneNote. I keep notes in OneNote about what I do for clients. And so I go and do a search there for if I'm running into a problem. The one thing I do, and Joanne mentioned it, and I'm glad she did, I reach out to people who are, if it's something that I am not what I would call an expert in, maybe something I just don't deal with every day. If it's something like compliance or records or labels or something like that in Microsoft 365, then I'm going to reach out to Joanne or my friend Drew, Madeline, just to kind of ping off of them as something, am I doing this right? I think reaching out to that professional kind of network is something that people should take advantage of as well.
Ruven, would you say that you've leveraged the community of others and maybe in addition to that found some way back from the peak of craziness back to just getting things done and either searching for workarounds or making progress? What's your insight?
So I rely on the kindness of strangers, which means searching the internet. But I think that, one of the reasons that we all know each other and that we're friends for years going back is the well-known and incredible nature of the community of SharePoint practitioners and how we've come to rely on each other. I think Joanne alluded to this, that we have people that we feel comfortable calling and asking for help. We're not afraid of looking stupid in front of them. And, we hope we're being stupid and just missing something that they'll say, yeah, that's it right there. Or we'll confirm to you, gee, I haven't seen that before, or I've had that before and haven't been able to get around it and took this other tack. So the incredible richness of the community that we have and have had over the last 15 years has made this, and the ability then to get together for SharePoint and laugh over these crazy making things has also helped keep us sane, I think, a little bit.
I've got a great story about that. So we talked about Joanne's problem, or something that gives her, makes her crazy in the past, has been search. I was at a community event. Well, it was a conference in DC, and I had a client who was having search problems in 2007. And I could not figure out what the problem was. And I had the laptop in the hotel lobby, and it was after the day's events, and people were just helping out. And it turns out there were 6 MVPs standing around my laptop trying to figure out what in the world is going on with search.
The question, though, is, did the light bulb get screwed in?
It did not. So so I would maybe concur with Joanne that search could be problematic, but it is a great community who I think has really built up me. And I will say, I hope it has for others. But for me, I'm very thankful for the community to keep me sane when all of these things go crazy in SharePoint world. I just mentioned one earlier about I've got a whole list of things that, make me go crazy sometimes. But the community really is there and has helped me out so much.
I want to turn just a little bit. I'd like to pose the question to all three of you that is maybe based on some of these things in the past or within, the recent adjustments. What is SharePoint getting right these days? There must be, over the course of years, a lot of things that have kept you on the platform, kept you recommending to your customers, the same workaround. Hopefully you didn't have to do it for too many years once things got addressed or fixed. But what do you think, in your own perspective, what is SharePoint getting right these days? Joanne?
I mean, I do other things other than search, but I'm going to stick in that same vein. And I am super impressed with Microsoft Search for a couple of reasons. One is how quick content is crawled now. It blows my mind. It's super fast to get results back after they've been uploaded. Still that piece where you don't have insight into when things are being crawled, but as they're improving the search engine, that is becoming less and less of an issue, that piece. And the PNP search web parts and all of the capabilities in the back end of search are just really, really powerful. And I don't think lots of organizations are leveraging it to the degree to which they could likely. I'm really impressed with the efforts being put in on that space.
One of the things that has been interesting with Microsoft Search recently is the indexing time.
Yeah.
So the search freshness has gone way down. Mm-hmm. Performance and improvements, just like you're saying.
Well, let's say, I got to correct you. Search freshness has gone up. Indexing time has gone down.
Sorry, yes.
But
to balance that, and it's not a negative in the context, it's more of even more content types and content sources are being crawled, in addition to the layer of the Microsoft graph. And the last thing, just to kind of put, I think, kind of a kudos to the team, is that value of moving people from on-prem to the cloud. It used to be this bridge that was not yet crossed in terms of if your content was on-prem, well, forget about it. But really, the breadth of hybrid search and not have that be a negative experience, at least, after the first instance, now it's improved a lot. It has been, a big area of work for the team.
I think that Microsoft has worked really hard and has succeeded at making things work closer to the way you expect them to. That you can find the things that you need to get the job done that you need to get done. That consistency, despite the save button or the settings button moving from one side to the other, but really getting the look and feel right, the functionality closer to something that someone can understand by looking at. And it's just a better experience and getting better all the time. And I'd like to add another sort of layer on top of that. I think that Microsoft, by limiting what SharePoint was meant to be in some ways, like it's not good for hosting your public-facing website, has brought better focus and eliminated some of the things that had to be crazy about it in order to support those scenarios. So by focusing on what matters and focusing on what it wants to be, and then focusing on making the user experience better, I think that's been successful, and that's really worked.
I was actually going to say something, and so when you kind of added on, I think that it's correct, is that it's not just about making the experience what it should be. It's setting the right expectation of what you're going to be getting. And I think you're exactly right that Microsoft has improved on that communication of this is what SharePoint is for. Here is the powerful tool for, documents and news and that communication, but it is not these other things. Here's these other tools for that, and not just provided the great experience, but also making sure that marketing of this is what it is for has been, I think, vastly improved and refined.
If I heard you correctly, and I think completely understand the value of being a lot more laser focused. It used to be the Swiss Army knife, the SharePoint pie that did, 6 things plus, plus, plus. I remember somebody in the community had put out a kind of a recreation of the SharePoint pie and said, business intelligence is now Power BI. Social is now Yammer. And around the wheel, there was kind of this handoff, whether it was still connected, with SharePoint already still involved, or if it was just a complete handoff. Appreciate hearing that feedback. Not to think we got it just right or it's perfect, but I've really liked that the teams have optimized, knowing that there are other people in play when it comes to Microsoft 365, the real offering today. It's not just SharePoint, but what people get is a lot of applications and tools. And SharePoint is not always the solution for everything, as it may have been more in the past. But are there things, within what is a little bit more honed these days that there's still you'd like it to see a little bit more focused, or does it feel like the right balance for the role that it plays in Microsoft 365?
I have one sort of crazy making thing, and this is partially probably my own fault. I'm supposed to be the expert, but maybe not as good as I think I am, is the idea of SharePoint is the place where you go to work, or Office 365, and yet I find myself way too often creating something somewhere, saving it to my local device, and then uploading it to SharePoint, or an email message where I can't quite get that attachment to the place within Teams or in SharePoint where it needs to go, and it just kind of breaks the path of your daily workflow. That's still a bit of a crazy making thing. It's getting better. Sometimes you can really hunt and it'll show you that group or that site or that team where you want to save that thing, but sometimes you hunt in vain.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As we round out and understand what's made you crazy and some of the things that brought you back from the brink, we'd love to hear, if you have a very specific, pretty recent SharePoint win that you'd be willing to share. No need to name any customer names, or does not have to be a giant project. And it can be similar to what you've been sharing around the topics of search and customization and some of the end user experiences, or something totally different, but just something that you would say, what, my personal experience or on behalf of my customer, SharePoint has really done a good job in, this space. And not just what we were just talking about, what it got right, but just something specifically a recent win. Joanne?
I actually just today, I finished a solution. Took probably, I want to say 2 to 3 business days to build for a team. What was once quite a labor-intensive update an Excel spreadsheet every quarter and email that out to a bunch of people with a bunch of links. And it was a real dog's breakfast, and the process was, needed some re-engineering. So we looked at it, broke it apart, and gave them a new modern team site, put some really good information architecture on there, applied retention, built a Microsoft Power Automate flow to automate all of that stuff they were doing in their Excel spreadsheet. And then, of course, used some modern search web parts on their homepage to highlight some of the material content for some of their consumers. So that's how you build solutions nowadays. That's how I do many, many things for my customers. It's just kind of components come together to build a solution within SharePoint.
Yeah, you hit on a fun, interesting area. I honestly wasn't exposed to the level of how people leveraged Excel beyond what Excel is created for.
Excel is king.
It really is. And it has a very great following and wonderful use cases and lots of great integration. But until I started doing a lot more with lists and now with Microsoft Lists, I never really came across the people that were leading with wanting to validate and keep Excel in the game, when really there's, other solutions, different use cases that it's really, really, truly king in, but some maybe more joker.
Yeah.
Daniel, what would you say a recent win to share?
Yeah, and I'll kind of stay on the same vein, though, that where I started off with customizations. Recently developed a intranet for a client, and we started the conversation. It was about how, the look and feel that they wanted, and how they really were wanting customization. That's really what they were looking for. But with the branding tools that we have out of the box and the capabilities of really bringing content to the page in an effective way to, kind of bring out that branding, we were able to effectively, develop this intranet, deploy it, give them templates, for sites using PNP. And it really was an experience where at the end, there were no customizations. We didn't do anything crazy and try to, bring in third-party products or anything like that. It was a simple but effective intranet homepage with news and such. But we really didn't have any of that pain. So I think, if you compare that with what all of us that have been working within SharePoint for any considerable amount of time will have, of that pain of customizations and upgrades and migrations and all that, it was really simple to really put together for that client. I think one thing that Joanne mentioned about search, it was the PNP search web parts. We did have to use those because in modern search, we don't have refiners. That is a pain point, but we do have that capability of utilizing those web parts, those PNP web parts to give that experience. They're quite powerful.
We will for sure pass along to Vesa, Yvonne, and the PNP team. I certainly, in hearing both what you and Joanne have referenced in leveraging PNP, I always think of them as the ultimate workaround, that it's very supported, very community-driven, and very responsive to what's needed right now. Maybe we'll get solved in a quarter or a cycle or two, but really addressing the problems and having a really solid team behind it. To round us out, Ruven, where have you seen a recent win?
We had a client that wanted to really help drive adoption of Office 365 and especially Teams within their organization. And they wanted it to tie into a custom learning management system that they have. They wanted to track details of how much time people were spending taking training. They wanted governance and training site. We put together a proposal that would meet their needs. And even before getting that proposal, they came back to us and said, our budgets have been slashed. We've got essentially nothing that we can do right now, but we still need help with adoption. What can we do? And so we went to the lookbook and found the Microsoft Learning Pathways site that has a web part that links to Microsoft's free video training, and created a Microsoft Forms for self-attestation of which courses they took. And it got them 80% of where they wanted to go for almost nothing. So that was a win.
That's a big one. That's a great one. Yeah, the learning pathways and what the lookbook offers, whether it's just reference or actually used in production, it has gotten a lot of really good feedback, and it really is representative of what started as the art of the possible, but it is also now becoming part of the solution, which is really, really great to hear. On behalf of Chris and I would love to thank you for being brave and sharing what has made you crazy, even if it's easy to talk around the virtual water cooler when you're close with friends and good colleagues. It's also really helpful to others to hear I'm not alone. And hopefully on this podcast, it's good to represent the balance of what has made somebody crazy, but to know that there is a product and a service, and hopefully the value you've shared collectively about the people, both the community and the people at Microsoft behind it, that's worth sticking around for. We would love to hear last words in terms of how can people find out more about what you and your company do, best ways to keep in contact with you in terms of following your actions and any materials you're putting out there, or any events that you want to plug that you'll be speaking at, starting with Joanne.
I blog a lot by a blog by my name, so joannecklein.com. That's also how you can reach out to me. I have bookings through Microsoft Bookings on there, a link on my blog. And my next event, I believe, is a information governance half-day workshop at Virtual SharePoint Fest.
Excellent. Daniel, how can people most easily follow you and maybe some things you'll be doing recently that they can attend?
Yeah. So my blog is danielglenn.com. Keep it simple. And you can follow me on Twitter. That's I'm most active there, posting technology things and random musings. I'm actually just wrapping up my speaking schedule for the year. I am taking off the remainder of this year. I just finished up with PASS Summit. We had 2 sessions there. I did a session for Chicago's Microsoft 365 today as well, and various other events that I had done. I think I've given 10 talks in the last 2 months, I believe. So I'm taking the rest of the time off, but we'll be raring to go in the new year as we start off with, I'm participating in SharePoint Fest as well. So once we get going in the new year, I will be speaking at various events. So please just follow me and I'll let you know about those.
Terrific. And this is Ruven. I spent a decade, one of the best decades of my life, speaking at over 100 conferences and blogging and tweeting and things like that. And I don't do that much of that anymore. But you can see the thinking of me and my team at avanade.com, avanade.com. I'm on Twitter but also more passionately on Instagram with my photography that I really enjoy. Both of those are Ruven G, Ruveng.
Can you give us just a little audible on the visuals? Do you have a specific type of photo that you like to take that you orient around?
Yes. I discovered photography in New York just using my phone. I grew up in Toronto, and then I moved to New York about 7 years ago and lived for 3 years in Manhattan. And I started just taking the people and the actions of New York, and I really, really loved it. And so I started to buy cameras and trade it in for other cameras, and really enjoyed what a lot of people call street photography with a little bit of architecture. Then I moved to Los Angeles, and it's a very different experience being on the street here. And I've become much more landscape and sights and sounds type photography, still the occasional portrait and people on the street.
Well, it sounds like you haven't had a shortage of people watching. When you think about New York City and Los Angeles, you probably got some of the best people watching in all of the country.
It's great.
That's cool. We'll put all the show notes will be filled with everything and all the ways that people can hear and see what it is that you're doing. But on behalf of Chris and I and the IntraZone and Microsoft, for all the work that you do with customers and sharing across your peers and listening to the good and the bad, we want to thank you for sharing your crazy insights and hope you have a great, great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Up next on the IntraZone, FAQs, or frequently asked questions. This is a chance for Mark and I to review things that we know that the community has asked us often that we want to share our responses to. So Mark, what is a question you've been hearing recently?
So I've been getting a question recently, and the most recently, actually this week as we're recording during the GlobalCon 4 event, I'm getting asked, can I create a task from a list item? With the new rollout of Microsoft Lists, they're starting to ask how is it connected to tasks and tasks within, especially being able to create a task from a list. This is something that you could do today with Power Automate. It's one of those things that certainly can be accomplished, would require that higher level of skill set. But I think the real question is leaning towards, I see you do it in other places, and it should be, or we'd like it to be easy, specific to a list item. So there is a task service across Microsoft 365. And one example in Word for the web that we have today is you can add a comment, @mention somebody, and then up-level that in the way that you can then assign it as a task, which then notifies the user, draws them into the comment and the document, and of course they can then get their work done and take that as a task assignment. So we are seeing that as a repeatable pattern. We don't yet have anything to fully communicate, but we do have comments on lists. We did announce at Ignite that we will have @mentions within those comments. So to take that next step, similar to what you see today in Word for the web, to be able to then assign as a task is something that the team is reviewing. So at this point in time, you can accomplish it with Power Automate, and certainly an area for us to review and to provide some more feedback, have a little more confidence on the way that we'll move forward on that one. Chris, you must get a ton of FAQs across the different areas that you focus on, or maybe some random questions. Any good ones recently that you'd like to take as your FAQ?
Yeah, there's a couple. I did a few keynotes over the past 2 weeks, and there's panel discussions that come up at the end of those. I want to reserve some of those for a future thing, but just know that, like, top of mind, the nature of knowledge and knowledge management and the overview of where the industry is headed is definitely a question we get a lot. And since this is a single podcast, not a season, I'm not going to go into that. The much pointier, specific question that I've gotten 3 times in the last week relates to syntax. And the question is, if I have 2 kinds of purchase orders in my organization, I have a standard format and a newer format, but customers are allowed to use both, do I have to build separate models for each layout? And the answer is now you don't. With some of the new capabilities that we've integrated in with AI Builder, you can add multiple layouts. So if you have 2 similar structures, your model can distinguish between both of those as long as you have at least 5 examples of each to teach the model. So very specific feature, and one that I can definitely answer in 60 seconds or less here.
I like it. I just also want to inform you, Chris, thanks to your click-through demo, I have now, in quotes, technically given my first SharePoint syntax demo. And it was a whirlwind of success because you programmed it perfectly.
Oh, thank you. It's funny that you mentioned that because I also, that demo is one I know that has driven a few people crazy online because I get questions about those, but I appreciate the compliment.
Well, it is a complex demo, not only in the feature, it's actually pretty straightforward once you get the sequence right, but you've made it, so that you can show, especially if you know the demo, so you can show a number of different things kind of back and forth. It's not just a single directive, one sequential demo. I liked it, and it came across nicely on the interwebs.
So thank you very much, Mark. Thanks to our listeners. And if you have a question you'd like to see Mark and I answer on a future podcast, please contact us through the intrazone at Microsoft.com, and we'll be sure to feature it in an upcoming broadcast.
So let's turn our attention to talk about events and talk about being timely. The first event that we want to talk about is tomorrow. We're releasing this on December 8th, and starting December 9th through the 11th is the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference. And this is a pretty big one. Microsoft is a sponsor along with other great sponsors. There are sessions, there are keynotes, 3 keynotes from Jeff Teeper, Caruana Gatumu, and Dan Holm. And there are about 80 plus sessions and 14 workshops. So it's a whirlwind of 3 days of training, a lot of networking. Of course, the community is coming together. And it's a great event. It's managed by the same team behind the SharePoint conference that is typically in Las Vegas. But this one will be virtual. So we'll have a link in the show notes where you can go to register, join in. There's something for everybody across the Microsoft 365 app spectrum for IT, for developers, and of course for end users. Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference starts tomorrow.
Coming up next week, Envision. So this is a business leader focused event. We're kicking it off December 15th, 2020 at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So Envision is something that we collaborate on with our partners Accenture and Avanade. It's a chance to hear from other business leaders, share perspectives, engage with thought leaders, live sessions, Q&A. It's a really great place to take a look at technology from a business perspective.
The next thing that we want to highlight is an ongoing event or series of workshops from the SharePoint Fest team. These are all virtual workshops, typically, 4 to 5 hours long, and they are ranging and running from November 2020 and even now scheduled through February 2021. So you can join Microsoft team members and MVPs to learn about things around SharePoint, OneDrive, Power BI, Microsoft Teams. The list is not short, and there are a lot that are upcoming. And we want to highlight a few in these final days and weeks in December 2020, where there are upcoming workshops about deploying Teams, Power BI for SharePoint users, Power Automate, and Power Apps, with more to come, as I mentioned, in January and February. And to round us off, Chris, I think you've got a couple of office hours coming up.
Yeah, some of you know we have a monthly series that we run through Project Cortex called Office Hours. It's a lot like the podcast. It's not as good, and you have to look at me. So it's a Teams live event. The one that we have coming up next week is a special one, sort of a year in recap. So we're sitting down. We made an announcement today. We want to kind of look at where SharePoint has gone this year in terms of usage, and really in looking at those trends forward, celebrate the Gartner Content Services Platform Magic Quadrant results, which just were released yesterday. So really excited about that.
Up and to the right. Up and to the right.
Up and to the right, indeed. And of course, as we look forward to 2021, we're grateful to all of our listeners, and we look forward to sharing more news about your events as we move into the new year. Hopefully some of those will be even more than virtual. And if you have one of those or a virtual event, please let us know. We'd love to feature it on an upcoming broadcast. Well, that was a lovely musical interlude right there, wasn't it, Mark? These are the things that I do that drive our crack production staff crazy, because when I say there was music there, they have a choice of either having to go actually add music or leave it out to make me sound crazy. And that's probably a vote for the latter. Enough. We really want to take time. We know it's very busy here as we get close to year end. We want to thank Joanne, Ruven, and Daniel for sharing their crazy with us today on the Intrazone. And we'll put links to everything they talked about and more in the show notes.
You can check out our show page at aka.ms/theintrazone to see all past shows.
And of course, if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, and why wouldn't you be, please visit aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and the adoption.microsoft.com site to learn more.
You can email us anytime at theintrazone@microsoft.com or on Twitter at SharePoint @mcashman and cmcnulty2000.
Word of mouth is always the best way people learn about new podcasts. So if you enjoy this show, help us help more people and let them know. Share that SharePoint love and subscribe at the turbulent fringe of your crazy or wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh, the chaos. Oh, the crazy. We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty, and you've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 intelligent, crazy intranet.